Jake Morrison adjusted his tie for the 5th time that morning as he walked through the massive corridors of the Galactic Council building. The walls stretched up so high that clouds formed near the ceiling, and the architecture was designed to make every species feel small and humble. Jake had been Earth's ambassador for 3 years now, but he still felt like a tourist in this place. The morning session was supposed to be routine paperwork, new planet registrations, trade route updates, the usual boring stuff that kept the galaxy running smoothly. Jake took his seat in the human section, which was still embarrassingly small compared to the elder races. The Veltar delegation alone took up an entire wing with their tentacles and breathing apparatus. Zeth Kalar, the Council's chief archivist, was a Veltar who had been doing this job for longer than human civilization had existed. His purple tentacles moved across holographic displays with practiced ease as he updated the central database. Each planet had to be properly cataloged with its astronomical coordinates, trade classifications, and biological hazard ratings. Next item, Zeth Kalar announced in his translator-filtered voice, planetary registry updates for Sol system worlds. Jake barely paid attention. Earth's paperwork was always in order. President Helen Stone back home made sure of that. The last thing humanity needed was to give the other species any reason to question their membership in the Council. But something was wrong. Zeth Kalar's tentacles had stopped moving. His large black eyes were staring at his display with what Jake had learned to recognize as confusion in Veltar facial expressions. The archivist's breathing tubes were fluttering rapidly, which was never a good sign. "Is there a problem?" asked Chancellor Vorth from his raised platform. The Nexari leader's crystal blue skin was showing concern patterns. Zeth Kalar's voice came out smaller than usual. "The coordinates for Earth, 3rd planet of the Sol system. They do not match the registry." Jake felt his stomach drop. Paperwork errors could be serious in galactic politics. "What kind of mismatch?" he called out, trying to keep his voice steady. "The official registry lists Sol 3 at coordinates that do not exist, but the actual astronomical position of your homeworld." Zeth Kalar paused, his tentacles shaking. "These coordinates are already in our database. They have been there for 30,000 years. The chamber grew quiet. Even the usual background hum of translation devices seemed to fade away. "That's impossible," Jake said, standing up. "Earth has only been known to the galactic community for 3 years. We were a completely isolated world before faster-than-light travel." Zeth Kalar was now frantically working his displays, cross-referencing data that Jake couldn't understand. Other archivists were helping him, their tentacles dancing across holographic interfaces with increasing urgency. "The coordinates match. A world from the Forbidden Archives," announced Kesmila, one of the younger archivists. Her voice carried a note of fear that made Jake's blood run cold. Chancellor Vorth's skin patterns shifted to deep warning colors. "The Forbidden Archives are sealed for a reason, young one. What name is associated with those coordinates?" The chamber held its breath. Even the background systems seemed to go quiet. "Terra Mortis," Kesmila whispered. "The Death World. The May." Reaction was immediate and terrifying. Several elder species representatives fled their seats entirely. The Kethmori delegate, whose race Jake had always found dignified and calm, was making high-pitched noises that his translator couldn't process. Even Chancellor Vorth had gone completely white, his skin patterns chaotic with panic. "This is obviously some kind of mistake," Jake said loudly, trying to restore order. "Earth is not whatever this Terra Mortis is supposed to be. We're a peaceful species. We grow food and make art and argue about sports. We don't even have a proper military." But nobody was listening to him anymore. The chamber had erupted into chaos as different species groups huddled together, speaking in rapid bursts that the translators couldn't keep up with. Jake caught fragments. The apex predators, biological weapons, the Great Silence. Meanwhile, on the far side of the galaxy, Dr. Lisa Carter was having her own disturbing morning. The human research vessel Discovery hung in orbit around a dead world that had once hosted a thriving civilization. The ruins below were typical of what they'd been finding lately: advanced technology, beautiful architecture, and absolutely no explanation for why everyone had simply vanished. Same pattern as the last 6 worlds. reported Captain Ryan Brooks as he reviewed the survey data. Population somewhere between 2 and 5 billion. Technology level roughly equivalent to our own industrial age. Then nothing. No signs of war, no evidence of natural disaster, no plague markers in the biological samples. Lisa stared at the holographic display showing the ancient city below. Beautiful spired buildings reached toward the sky, but they were all empty. Wind and time had worn away most traces of whoever had built them, but the bones of the civilization remained. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Look at this symbol that keeps appearing in every ruin we've explored." She pulled up the recurring image they'd found carved into walls, worked into decorative patterns, and even embedded in the ancient computer systems they'd managed to decode. It was simple but unmistakable. A small blue-green sphere with distinctive continental patterns. "It looks like Earth," Ryan said, leaning closer to the display. "Exactly like Earth," Lisa confirmed. "Same continental shapes, same proportions, same everything. We found this symbol in ruins across 12 different star systems, Ryan. Civilizations that died out thousands of years before humans even developed agriculture." They stared at the image in silence. The implications were staggering, but neither wanted to be the first to say what they were both thinking. Back on the council world, the chaos was getting worse. Jake had tried calling for order, but his voice was lost in the panic. Emergency broadcasts were being sent across the galactic communication network, and he could see warships beginning to move on the tactical displays. Zeth Kalar approached, him with obvious reluctance, his tentacles curled into defensive positions. "Ambassador Morrison," the archivist said carefully, "how much do your people know about their own history?" "What do you mean?" Jake asked. "We know our history. We have records going back thousands of years. I mean your real history, your species' origin, your early expansion into space." Jake stared at him. "We never expanded into space before 3 years ago. Earth was completely isolated until we developed faster-than-light travel. We're new to all this." Zeth Kalar's skin color shifted to something Jake had never seen before, a pale gray that somehow looked like sadness and terror mixed together. "Ambassador," the archivist said softly, "according to our oldest records, your species once controlled nearly half the galaxy, and wherever they went, entire civilizations simply stopped existing." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Around them, the council chamber continued its descent into panic as 30,000 years of carefully buried history began to resurface. Something was very wrong with humanity's story, and the galaxy was about to remember why they had tried so hard to forget. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything Jake Morrison had ever witnessed. Representatives from every major species packed the chamber, many of them looking like they hadn't slept in days. The usual polite diplomatic chatter was replaced by tense whispers and nervous glances in his direction. Jake sat alone in the human section. His usual lunch companions from the Altarian trade delegation had moved to seats across the chamber. Even the maintenance staff seemed to avoid his area when they came through to check the environmental systems. Chancellor Vorth called for order, but his crystal blue skin was still showing stress patterns. The council recognizes Elder Thesimova of the Kethmori Collective. The Kethmori delegate rose slowly from her curved seat. Her species was one of the oldest in the galaxy, with records stretching back over 50,000 years. Jake had always found her dignified and wise, but now she looked ancient and frightened. "Honored members," Thesimova began, her voice carrying the weight of millennia. "I speak now of things my people have tried to forget for 30,000 years. In our oldest archives, kept in the deepest vaults of our homeworld, there are records of the Terran Scourge." Jake felt every eye in the chamber turn toward him. "The what?" he called out, standing despite protocol. Thesimova's large silver eyes focused on him with something that looked like pity. "Your people, Ambassador. Not as they are now, but as they once were. They came from the small yellow star in ships that moved between worlds like death itself. Where they went, civilizations died." "That's impossible," Jake protested. "Humanity has never been spacefaring before 3 years ago. Our oldest space program barely managed to reach our own moon. The records do not lie. replied Veldoran, an ancient representative from the Spiral Alliance. His voice was old enough to remember when the galaxy had twice as many inhabited worlds. They describe beings who looked exactly like you. Same size, same biology, same aggressive curiosity, but they were not contained to a single world. Back on Earth, President Helen Stone was having an emergency meeting with her top advisors. The secure communication from Ambassador Morrison had arrived just hours ago, but already her entire cabinet was in crisis mode. "This has to be some kind of mistake," she insisted, pacing around the Oval Office. "Or alien propaganda. They're trying to make us look dangerous so they can justify restrictions on our expansion." Dr. Andrew Clark, director of the Xenoarchaeological Institute, cleared his throat nervously. He was a thin man who usually preferred dusty ruins to political meetings, but circumstances had forced him into the spotlight. "Ma'am, I'm afraid the evidence is starting to support their claims," he said quietly. "Our research teams across the galaxy have been finding disturbing patterns. Every dead civilization we've studied shows signs of contact with a species that matches human characteristics." Helen stopped pacing. "What kind of contact?" "Not violent contact, which is the strange part. The ruins show evidence of trade, cultural exchange, even cooperative building projects. But then the alien populations just fade away. Population centers become smaller, then smaller, until they're abandoned entirely." General Patricia Hayes, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, leaned forward in her chair. "You're talking about conquest without war?" "I'm talking about something worse," Dr. Clark replied. "I'm talking about extinction without anyone realizing it was happening." On the outer Rim Research Station Endeavor, Dr. Rebecca Foster was making a discovery that would change everything. She had been running routine biological compatibility tests on human samples, checking to see how human bacteria might affect the local ecosystems of potential colony worlds. The results were terrifying. "Computer, run the simulation again," she said for the 10th time, hoping she had made some kind of error. The holographic display showed the same result it had shown every time. Human bacteria, the normal harmless bacteria that every human carried in their body, was lethal to every alien species they had sampled. Not just harmful, but completely deadly within hours of exposure. "This can't be right," she muttered, checking her equipment again, but everything was working perfectly. The alien tissue samples simply couldn't survive contact with human biological material. She ran a broader test, using samples from dozens of different alien species they had encountered. The result was always the same. Humans were walking biological, weapons carrying microscopic death with them wherever they went. Captain Steve Roberts found her in the lab 12 hours later, still staring at the data. "Rebecca, you missed the morning briefing," he said with concern. "The Council wants all research data transmitted immediately. Something about humanity's past." She looked up at him with haunted eyes. "Steve, we're plague carriers. Every single one of us. We've been spreading death to alien species just by being in the same room with them." He stared at her. "That's impossible. We've been interacting with aliens for 3 years. If we were dangerous, they would have noticed." Rebecca pulled up another display. "Our environmental suits, our ship's air filtration, the quarantine protocols, we followed during first contact. We thought we were being polite, following their customs, but really we were accidentally protecting them from us." The implications hit him like a physical blow. "The colonies, the new settlements where we're working alongside alien populations." "The populations are declining," Rebecca confirmed. "Slowly, naturally, from what looks like normal biological drift. But it's actually us. We're killing them just by existing in their environment." Meanwhile, the Galactic Council session had moved to the restricted archives deep beneath the main building. Ancient data storage systems hummed to life for the first time in millennia, as the eldest species shared their most carefully guarded secrets. Jake was escorted through security checkpoints by armed guards who wouldn't meet his eyes. The underground chambers were older than human civilization, filled with the combined knowledge of species that had been exploring the galaxy when Earth was still covered in ice. These records are kept in the original languages, explained archivist Zeth Kalar as they approached a massive data terminal. Translation has always been forbidden to prevent the knowledge from spreading accidentally. The display showed star charts that Jake could barely comprehend. But one thing was clear. Vast sections of the galaxy showed as dead zones, empty of the civilizations that had once thrived there. And the pattern of death followed clear paths through space, like routes traced by explorers or traders. "The great silence," whispered Elder Thesimova. "Over 2,000 years, 40% of the galaxy's inhabited world simply stopped responding to communication. No distress calls, no final messages, no explanations. They just went quiet." Jake studied the patterns. The dead zones formed clear corridors through space, connecting star systems in logical exploration sequences. "It looks like someone was systematically exploring the galaxy." "Not someone," Thesimova replied. "Your people, the Terrans. They spread out from their homeworld in great ships, establishing colonies and trade routes. But everywhere they went, the local populations began to disappear." Chancellor Vorth activated another display, showing biological data from the ancient archives. At first, the affected worlds reported strange illnesses, diseases that their medical knowledge couldn't understand or treat. But the Terrans were unaffected, even helpful, providing aid and assistance to the dying populations. They didn't know, Jake realized with growing horror. The ancient humans had no idea they were causing the deaths. "Exactly," confirmed Veldoran. "They were puzzled by the population declines but attributed them to unknown environmental factors or natural selection pressures. They continued their expansion, unaware that they were the cause of the very disasters they were trying to help solve." The final piece of the puzzle came from the deepest archives, records so old that they existed only as quantum impressions in crystalline storage matrices. "The containment protocols," Thesimova said quietly. "When the surviving species finally understood what was happening, they faced an impossible choice. The Terrans were not evil, not deliberately destructive. They were simply biologically incompatible with galactic life." Jake stared at the ancient data, showing the slow retreat of human expansion, the gradual abandonment of colony worlds, and finally the complete isolation of Earth itself. "You quarantined us," he said. "You trapped humanity on Earth. We saved the galaxy," Elder Veldoran replied. "And we saved your species from the guilt of knowing what they had done." The chamber fell silent as the full weight of 30,000 years of hidden history settled around them. Humanity's emergence into galactic society wasn't their first contact with alien life. It was their return to a galaxy that still remembered why they had been locked away. Dr. Patricia Hayes stared at the translated documents spread across her desk in the xenobiology lab. The ancient records painted a picture of humanity that she could barely comprehend. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she couldn't tear herself away from the data. "The Terran expansion period," she read aloud to Colonel Kevin Miller, who sat across from her looking equally disturbed, "began approximately 30,000 years ago when the species achieved faster-than-light travel. Using early jump drive technology." Kevin leaned forward in his chair. "Jump drives? We only developed those 3 years ago. The technology is completely new." Patricia flipped through another section of the translated text. "According to these Veltar records, the ancient humans were master engineers. They built massive colony ships that could support thousands of people for decades. They weren't just explorers, they were permanent settlers." The door to the lab opened, and Ambassador Morrison walked in, looking like he hadn't slept in days. The emergency shuttle from the Council world had brought him straight to Earth's capital, and he still wore his diplomatic uniform, now wrinkled and stained. "What have we learned?" Jake asked, slumping into a chair. Patricia gestured to the documents. "Your people were everywhere, Jake. Look at this." She activated a holographic display showing the galaxy as it existed 30,000 years ago. Thousands of star systems glowed with the markers of thriving civilizations. "Now look at this," she continued, switching to a different display. This one showed the galaxy as it existed 25,000 years ago. Vast sections were dark, empty of the civilizations that had once flourished there. The expansion followed. Trade routes, Kevin observed, studying the patterns. They weren't conquering, they were exploring and settling, just like we're doing now. Exactly like we're doing now, Patricia agreed grimly. The ancient humans established colonies on hundreds of worlds. They traded with local species, shared technology, built mixed settlements. But everywhere they went, the native populations began to decline. Jake rubbed his tired eyes. The council archives said they didn't know they were causing the deaths. How is that possible? Patricia pulled up biological data from the ancient records. Because the effect was gradual and looked natural. A human settlement would be established, and for the first few months everything would be fine. The local populations would even grow initially due to improved living conditions and medical care. But then the local birth rates would start dropping. Not dramatically, just a few percentage points each year. Deaths from minor illnesses would increase slightly. Nothing that would trigger alarms, especially for a spacefaring civilization dealing with new planetary environments. Colonel Miller studied the data carefully. How long before a population would collapse completely? Anywhere from 50 to 200 years, depending on the species and the size of the human settlement. Long enough that most humans would live their entire lives without seeing the full effect. The implications were staggering. Jake stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the bustling city below. So our ancestors spread across the galaxy for thousands of years, unknowingly committing genocide wherever they went. It gets worse, Patricia said quietly. The records show that when human colonists noticed population declines in nearby alien settlements, they often tried to help. They provided medical aid, shared resources, even took in refugees from dying communities. Making the problem worse, by increasing contact, Kevin realized. Exactly. The more they tried to help, the faster the local populations died off. A new voice spoke from the doorway. Which is why the survivors had to take such drastic action. They turned to see Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Earth's leading geneticist, carrying a data pad with urgency written across her face. Elena? Patricia asked. What have you found? Elena entered the room and activated her own holographic display. I've been analyzing human genetic data from the past 30,000 years, looking for changes, mutations, anything that might explain how we went from galactic explorers to isolated planet dwellers. The display showed a complex genetic timeline, with DNA sequences highlighted in different colors. There are artificial modifications in our genetic code, Elena announced. Carefully crafted changes that have been degrading slowly over time. Someone altered human DNA and they were very good at it. Jake felt his stomach drop. What kind of modifications? Behavioral limitations primarily. Genetic markers that reduce aggressive expansion instincts, suppress certain types of curiosity, and create psychological satisfaction with limited territorial ranges. Elena highlighted specific gene sequences. But the modifications are breaking down. Each generation carries fewer of the artificial restrictions. Colonel Miller stood up sharply. Are you saying that aliens genetically modified our species? I'm saying that someone with extremely advanced biotechnology made changes to human genetics around 28,000 years ago. The timing matches exactly with when human expansion stopped and the species became isolated on Earth. Patricia stared at the genetic data. They didn't just quarantine us, they changed us, made us content with staying home. The modifications were remarkably sophisticated, Elena continued. Instead of crude behavioral suppression, they enhanced certain positive traits. Love of family, satisfaction with local community, appreciation for art and philosophy over exploration and conquest. They made us better people, Jake said slowly. But they also took away our choice to be anything else. Elena nodded grimly. And the modifications are wearing off. The genetic restrictions have been weakening for the past 500 years, accelerating in the last century. It explains why humanity suddenly developed an interest in space exploration after millennia of being content with Earth. A new alarm began sounding throughout the building. Colonel Miller immediately activated his communication device. Command, this is Miller. What's the situation? The response came through clearly. Colonel, Deep space monitoring stations are detecting multiple large objects approaching the solar system. Unknown configuration, but the technology signatures match the ancient human designs from the archived data. The room went completely silent. How many objects? Kevin asked. Preliminary count is 47 vessels, sir. Size class appears to be massive, larger than anything in the current human fleet. Jake felt the world spinning around him. The lost fleets. The what? Patricia asked. Elena was already pulling up additional genetic data. The records mention human populations that escaped the containment protocols, colony ships that were too far away to be reached when the quarantine was established. 47 ships, Kevin repeated. If each one carries the population of a colony vessel, we could be looking at millions of unmodified humans, Elena finished. Humans who never had their expansion instincts suppressed. Humans who have been exploring and adapting to deep space for 30,000 years. The communication device crackled again. Additional updates, sir. The approaching vessels are broadcasting on frequencies that match ancient Terran communication protocols. We're attempting translation now. Jake walked back to the window, but now the peaceful city below looked fragile and vulnerable. How long? Until they arrive? Estimated 14 hours at current velocity, sir. Patricia was studying the ancient records with new urgency. The genetic modifications weren't just behavioral. There were biological changes, too. Enhanced disease resistance, improved radiation tolerance, stronger immune systems. Makes sense, Elena agreed. If you're going to isolate a population on a single world, you want them to be as healthy and stable as possible. But the approaching humans won't have those modifications, Kevin realized. They'll have whatever natural adaptations they've developed during 30,000 years of space travel. Elena's genetic analysis was updating in real time as she processed the implications. Natural selection in space environments would favor completely different traits: radiation resistance, low gravity adaptation, enhanced aggression for resource, competition. They're not going to be like us, Jake said quietly. The communication device activated again, this time with a different voice. This is Admiral Marcus Chen of the Terran Deep Fleet, broadcasting to the planetary government of Terra, Prime. We are the descendants of the third colonial wave returning to reclaim our ancestral homeworld. The message continued. We have monitored your recent contact with the galactic community. The containment protocols have clearly failed. It is time for humanity to resume its rightful place in the galaxy. Jake looked at his companions in the WeWar lab. Dr. Hayes was still studying her biological data, Colonel Miller was calculating military responses, and Dr. Rodriguez was analyzing genetic implications. They call Earth Terra Prime, Jake observed. Not home, not Earth. Terra Prime like it's just another colony world to be claimed. Elena looked up from her genetic display with fear in her eyes. Jake, according to the biological models, unmodified, humans would still carry the same biological incompatibilities that made the ancient Terrans so dangerous. But 30,000 years of space adaptation, they could be even worse than their ancestors, Patricia finished. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been moved to the highest security bunker deep beneath the capital city. Representatives from every major species sat around a circular table that had not been used since the ancient wars. The air recycling systems worked overtime to accommodate the different atmospheric needs of dozens of different species, all gathered to discuss a crisis 30,000 years in the making. Elder Thesimova of the Kethmori stood at the center of the chamber, her ancient form supported by mobility assistance technology. In her hand she held a data crystal that glowed with an inner light, one of the few remaining original records from the time of the Great Containment. What I am about to share with you has been kept secret for 300 centuries, she began, her voice carrying across the chamber through perfect translation systems, the full details of how the Covenant of Worlds solved the Terran problem. Ambassador Morrison sat in the human section, but unlike the previous sessions, he was not alone. Captain Amanda Foster had arrived from the exploration vessel Horizon, along with Dr. Samuel Wright, Earth's leading expert on alien biology. They represented humanity's best hope of understanding what was coming. Thesimova activated the data crystal, and the chamber filled with holographic displays showing the galaxy as it existed 30,000 years ago. Ships moved between star systems in clear patterns marking the roots of the ancient human expansion. The Terran expansion lasted for nearly 2,000 years, she explained. By the time the surviving species understood what was happening, humans had established colonies on over 4,000 worlds. Direct confrontation had been attempted and failed repeatedly. Chancellor Vorth leaned forward in his seat. Failed? How? Human adaptability was beyond anything we had encountered, replied Elder Veldoran, his ancient voice heavy with memory. Military strikes against their colonies resulted in the humans developing new defensive technologies within years. Biological weapons designed to target their species were neutralized by rapid evolutionary adaptation. Even economic isolation only encouraged them to become more self-sufficient. Captain Foster spoke up from the human section. You're describing our ancestors like they were some kind of superspecies. They were, Thesimova confirmed. Not through any artificial enhancement, but through natural selection pressures that had shaped them on their harsh homeworld. Terra was a death world by galactic standards, and it had produced a species that could survive almost anything. The data crystal projected new images, showing the massive engineering project that had been the Galactic Covenant's final solution. Space stations the size of moons orbited at the edge of human territory, while fleets of automated vessels moved through the void in complex patterns. The containment protocol involved more than simple quarantine, Thesimova continued. We surrounded the core human territories with automated monitoring stations. Any ship attempting to leave the containment zone would be intercepted and turned back through non-lethal means. Dr. Wright studied the technical specifications flowing across the displays. These monitoring stations, they're incredibly sophisticated. The power requirements alone. The project consumed the combined resources of 200 civilizations for over 50 years, Elder Veldoran confirmed. But it was not enough to simply contain them. The humans would have eventually overcome any external barriers. The chamber grew quiet as Thesimova activated the final section of the data crystal. The holographic display now showed detailed genetic information, molecular structures that Dr. Wright recognized as DNA modification techniques. Internal containment, he said quietly, understanding flooding across his face. The humans had to be changed, Thesimova confirmed, but not harmed. The Covenant was unanimous that genocide was unacceptable, even to save the galaxy. Instead, we chose modification. Ambassador Morrison stood up, his face pale. You experimented on our entire species. We saved your species, corrected Chancellor Vorth, and we saved the galaxy from your species. The modifications were carefully designed to reduce harmful traits while enhancing beneficial ones. The genetic data showed the incredible complexity of what had been done. Instead of crude suppression of human capabilities, the modifications had been subtle and sophisticated. Aggressive expansion instincts were reduced while community bonding was enhanced. Territorial competition was diminished while cooperative behavior was encouraged. But the most important changes were cultural, Thesimova explained. We seeded your developing mythologies with concepts designed to encourage inward focus and satisfaction with limited territory. Dr. Wright was reading the cultural modification protocols with growing amazement. Paradise myths, lost golden ages, the concept that the best days were behind you rather than ahead. You programmed our religions and philosophies to make us content with staying home. The Garden of Eden, Atlantis, the golden age of mythology, Captain Foster realized. They weren't memories of real places. They were implanted concepts designed to make us believe our peak as a species was in the past. It worked for nearly 30,000 years, Elder Veldoran noted. Humanity became introspective, philosophical, artistic. You developed rich cultures focused on internal development, rather than external expansion, but you knew it wouldn't last forever, Ambassador Morrison said, understanding the full scope of what had been done. The genetic modifications were designed to degrade over time, Thesimova confirmed. We calculated that after approximately 30,000 years, human expansion instincts would begin to reassert themselves. By then, we hoped your species would have developed wisdom to balance their capabilities. Captain Foster was studying the timeline data. That's why humanity suddenly developed faster than light travel 3 years ago. The genetic restrictions finally weakened enough to allow our natural exploratory instincts to emerge. But something went wrong with your calculations, Dr. Wright observed, looking at recent genetic analysis data he had brought with him. The degradation has been accelerating in the past century. The genetic restrictions are breaking down much faster than predicted. The chamber's emergency communication system activated with an urgent tone. Council leadership, this is orbital monitoring. We have new contacts entering the system, multiple large vessels of unknown configuration. Chancellor Vorth activated the main display, showing the approaching ships. They were massive, clearly built for long-term deep space travel, and their design aesthetic was hauntingly familiar to anyone who had studied ancient human technology. The lost fleets, Ambassador Morrison said grimly. Impossible, Elder Veldoran protested. All human populations were accounted for during the containment protocol. Captain Foster was analyzing the ship configurations on her personal display. Not all of them. Look at these designs. These are third-wave colony ships, the deep exploration vessels that were launched in the final years of the original expansion. Dr. Wright pulled up the historical records on his device. The third wave was launched just before the containment protocol was implemented. 47 colony ships heading for the Galactic Rim, carrying approximately 2 million colonists. Million humans who were never contained, Thesmova said quietly. Never modified, never restricted. The communication system activated again, this time carrying an incoming message from the approaching fleet. This is Admiral Marcus Chen, commanding the Terran Deep Exploration Fleet. We address the Galactic Council and the current occupants of Terra Prime. The voice was unmistakably human, but there was something different about it. A confidence and authority that modern humans rarely displayed when speaking to alien powers. We have monitored your recent communications regarding the rediscovery of our homeworld's true identity. We are pleased that the galaxy remembers what humanity once was. We are here to ensure that the galaxy remembers what humanity can become. The message continued. The Terran people have spent 30,000 years adapting to the void between stars. We have grown strong in the darkness, evolved beyond the limitations that once confined our species to a single world. We return now to reclaim our place as the dominant species in this galaxy. The chamber erupted in panic. Representatives from dozens of species began talking at once, their translators creating a cacophony of overlapping voices. Security alerts echoed through the building as defensive measures were automatically activated. But Elder Thesmova remained calm, studying the approaching ships with the wisdom of someone who had lived through multiple galactic crises. The true test begins now, she said quietly to Ambassador Morrison. Your people stand at a crossroads. You can join your ancient cousins in their quest for dominance, or you can chart a different path. Jake looked at the displays showing both the panicking council members and the approaching human fleet. What if there's a third option? What do you mean? What if we refuse both choices? What if we neither submit to containment nor embrace domination? Thesmova's ancient eyes showed something that might have been hope. That would require wisdom beyond what your species possessed 30,000 years ago. Then it's a good thing we've had 30,000 years to develop that wisdom, Captain Foster said firmly. The first meeting between Earth humanity and the lost fleets took place in the neutral space between Earth's moon and Mars. Captain Diana Lee commanded Earth's newest battleship Vanguard, a vessel that looked like a toy compared to the massive ships that had emerged from the deep void. The lead vessel of the lost fleet was called Exodus, and it dwarfed anything in Earth's navy. 3 kilometers long and built from materials that seemed to absorb light, it moved through space with the confidence of a predator that had never known fear. This is Captain Lee of the Earth Defense Force vessel Vanguard, requesting permission to come aboard for diplomatic talks. The response came immediately in perfect English, but with an accent that sounded like no human dialect that had ever existed on Earth. Permission granted, Captain Lee. Be aware that our atmospheric conditions may differ from what you are accustomed to. Diana suited up in full environmental gear before crossing to the Exodus. Her scientific team, led by Dr. Samuel Wright, accompanied her with full biological monitoring equipment. They had no idea what 30,000 years of space adaptation had done to human physiology. The airlock of the Exodus was massive, designed to accommodate beings much larger than standard humans. When it cycled open, Diana found herself facing Admiral Marcus Chen and immediately understood why the modifications had been necessary. Chen stood nearly 7 feet tall, his frame lean but incredibly muscular. His skin had a slight gray tint, clearly adapted to different lighting conditions than Earth normal. His eyes were larger than typical human eyes, with pupils that contracted to pinpoints in the bright lights of the docking bay. "Welcome aboard, Captain Lee," Chen said, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to fill the entire space. "I trust your journey was pleasant?" Behind him stood other members of the Lost Fleet crew, all showing similar adaptations. They moved with a fluid grace that spoke of perfect adaptation to low-gravity environments, and Diana noticed that several of them had what looked like natural radiation shielding in their skin pigmentation. "Admiral Chen," Diana replied formally, "on behalf of Earth's government, I'm here to discuss the current situation." Chen smiled, and Diana was disturbed to notice that his teeth were slightly pointed, clearly adapted for a different diet than Earth humans consumed. "The current situation is quite simple, Captain. The galaxy belongs to humanity, and it's time. We reclaimed it." Dr. Wright was discreetly taking biological readings with his handheld scanner. The results were disturbing. The Lost Fleet humans showed massive physiological changes from baseline humanity. Enhanced muscle density, modified bone structure, and most worryingly, biological markers that suggested extreme adaptability to hostile environments. "Admiral," Diana said carefully, "Earth's position is that humanity should work with the galactic community, not dominate it." "Earth's position," Chen replied with amusement, "is the position of a genetically modified subspecies that has been conditioned to accept limitations." He gestured around the massive ship. "This is what unrestrained humanity becomes, Captain. We have spent 30,000 years becoming the apex predators that nature intended us to be." The tour of the Exodus revealed technology that was centuries ahead of anything Earth possessed. The ship's crew moved through corridors that would have been cramped for Earth humans but felt spacious for their modified frames. Everything was designed for efficiency and survival, with none of the aesthetic considerations that Earth humans valued. "Our population currently stands at approximately 50 million, Chen explained as they walked through the ship's command center. "Spread across 47 vessels and multiple space-based habitats, we have never known the luxury of planetary surfaces or stable environments." Dr. Wright studied the crew members they passed. "Admiral, our records suggest the original colony fleets carried only 2 million people. How did your population grow so dramatically?" "Selective breeding programs, genetic optimization, and very careful resource management," Chen replied matter-of-factly. "When survival depends on maximizing useful traits while minimizing resource consumption, evolution becomes a tool rather than a random process." The implications were chilling. The Lost Fleet humans hadn't just adapted to space. They had actively engineered themselves into something beyond baseline humanity. Meanwhile, back on Earth, President Helen Stone was meeting with her emergency council as reports came in from Captain Lee's diplomatic mission. The biological data being transmitted from the Vanguard painted a picture of humans that had become something entirely different. "They're not just adapted," Dr. Jennifer Walsh explained to the assembled leaders. "They've been actively modifying themselves for centuries. Enhanced disease resistance, improved radiation tolerance, modified digestive systems that can process a wider range of organic materials." General Patricia Hayes studied the military implications. "Their technology is significantly advanced, and their population has been optimized for survival in hostile conditions. In a direct confrontation, Earth wouldn't stand a chance." "But they're still human," President Stone insisted. "There has to be common ground." Dr. Walsh shook her head grimly. "Ma'am, The biological scans suggest they're carrying pathogens that would be lethal to both Earth humans and alien species. 30,000 years of adaptation to deep space has made them into walking biological weapons, even more dangerous than the original Terrans. The meeting was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Galactic Council. Elder Thesimova's image appeared on the main screen, her ancient features showing deep concern. "President Stone," the alien leader said, "our long-range sensors have detected massive fleet movements throughout the galaxy. The lost fleet that approached Earth was not alone. There are similar groups approaching major council worlds from multiple directions." The display showed a tactical overview of known space. Red markers indicated lost fleet vessels emerging from the galactic rim, all converging on populated systems. The scope of the operation was staggering. "How many ships?" President Stone asked. "Initial estimates suggest over 300 vessels of various sizes. The lost fleets have been planning this return for a very long time." Back aboard the Exodus, Admiral Chen was revealing the full scope of his people's intentions to Captain Lee. "The galaxy has grown weak in our absence," he explained, gesturing to a holographic display showing current galactic civilization. "Billions of beings living in carefully balanced ecosystems, dependent on complex trade networks and diplomatic agreements for survival." "That's called civilization," Diana replied. "Cooperation and mutual benefit." Chen laughed, a sound that was unmistakably human but somehow predatory. "Captain, your species was designed by natural selection to be apex predators. The artificial modifications that created modern Earth humans suppressed those instincts, but they didn't eliminate the underlying biology." Dr. Wright was studying the ship's environmental systems. "Admiral, our scans indicate that your people are carrying biological agents that would be harmful to both Earth humans and alien species. Are you aware of this?" "Of course we're aware," Chen replied dismissively. "It's one of our greatest advantages. We don't require the complex containment systems that modern humans use. When we establish a colony, the local ecosystem adapts to us or it dies out." "That's genocide," Diana said quietly. "That's nature," Chen corrected. "The strong survive, the weak are replaced. It's the fundamental law of existence that your people have forgotten." The negotiation continued for hours, but it became increasingly clear that the lost fleets had no intention of accepting limitations or restrictions. They had returned to reclaim what they saw as their birthright, dominion over the galaxy. However, the turning point came when Dr. Wright made an unexpected discovery. While analyzing the ship's biological systems, he found something that changed everything. "Admiral," he said carefully, "I've been studying your people's adaptations and I've found something interesting. Your enhanced immune systems and biological modifications make you incredibly dangerous to other species, but they also make you vulnerable in a way you might not realize." Chen turned toward him with interest. "Explain." "Your people have optimized for survival in isolation, in the void between stars. But you've lost the ability to coexist with other biological systems. You can dominate environments, but you can't share them." Dr. Wright activated his portable display, showing the biological analysis. "Earth humans retain the ability to coexist with alien biology through our containment systems and genetic modifications. We can adapt to work alongside other species. Your people can only replace them." "Your point?" Chen asked. "My point is that you're evolutionary dead ends," Dr. Wright said boldly. "You can conquer the galaxy, but you can't actually inhabit it alongside other life. You'll end up ruling over empty worlds alone in the void, just like you've been for the past 30,000 years. The statement hit Chen like a physical blow. Around the command center, other Lost Fleet personnel stopped their activities to listen. "But there's another option," Captain Lee said, seizing the moment. "Earth scientists have developed biocontainment technology that allows safe interaction between species. We could share that technology with you." Chen stared at her. "Why would you do that?"